Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, October 6th. And tonight, the losses continue to mount for Canada's governing hockey body, with Canadian Tire being the latest to drop its partnership with Hockey Canada. A spokeswoman says the company made the decision after careful consideration. The retailer joins TELUS, Tim Hortons, and Scotiabank in ending their sponsorships of Hockey Canada. The move stems from the organization's handling of alleged sexual assaults and the way money was paid out in lawsuits. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has floated the idea of creating a new national body to replace Hockey Canada. Meanwhile, Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem says more interest rate hikes are still necessary to bring down inflation. Now, this comes despite some early signs of a slowing economy. Speaking to the Halifax Chamber of Commerce today, Mr. Macklem said global events have fed into higher prices. This includes the pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But he says overall, inflation increasingly reflects domestic pressures, with demand outpacing supply across the Canadian economy. Mr. Macklem said, in hindsight, the bank's early estimate that high inflation was temporary was overly optimistic. Canadians may see a jump in the number of businesses applying surcharges for credit card use as restrictions on the practice lift today. Businesses secured the right to add a surcharge to credit card transactions, which they must clearly disclose. This was part of a class action lawsuit against MasterCard, Visa, and Canadian banks. A survey by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business found that close to 1 in 5 businesses are considering adding a surcharge. Now, this would be to offset the merchant fees that they pay for credit card processing. All right, turning to a new housing affordability report, which indicates a market correction is coming soon. The Desjardins report says affordability is set to improve next year, though to varying degrees across the country. It says provinces that saw the largest gains in housing prices during the pandemic will see the sharpest corrections post-pandemic. Cities like Edmonton and Calgary are expected to return to pre-pandemic affordability levels by late 2024, but Ontario won't come close. Well, some East Coast residents are wondering if it's worth living by the ocean side, considering the impact of climate change. This comes as seemingly once-in-a-lifetime storms are coming on an annual basis. Blair Greenan is a federal scientist at the Bedford Institute of Oceanography, and he says water temperatures off the Maritimes have gone up 1.5 degrees Celsius over the past century. He says the warmer waters are adding a potent source of increased energy for the storms. Well, as the Canadian military continues to deal with a severe shortage in recruitment, Defense Chief General Wayne Eyre is sounding the alarm. He is ordering an immediate halt to all non-essential activities in order to work on boosting recruitment and retention. He's calling for dramatic action to ensure the military has the troops it needs. His orders will see recruitment officials reviewing and re-strategizing the military's distribution of members and eliminating positions that are non-essential. Quebecers made history on Monday when they elected a record number of women to the province's legislature. But political observers say more work is needed to ensure equality persists. Out of the legislature's 125 seats, 58 were won by women. This includes 41 of the 90 seats won by the coalition Avenir Quebec. The executive director of a Quebec organization that advocates for more women in politics weighed in on this. And Esther Lapointe says that for real equality to be achieved, women need to be represented in the Premier's cabinet. One of the victims of the James Smith Cree Nation stabbing rampage has woken up. Joyce Burns and her husband Earl were among the 28 people attacked during the mass killings on the First Nation last month. Earl Burns was among the 11 people killed in the rampage. Joyce's brother, Victor Sanderson, says she is starting to heal and is expected to be released from hospital at some point next month. The RCMP now say that Miles Sanderson killed 11 people on his own. His brother Damien was included in the dead. Canadian food banks are hoping for a generous season of giving as the demand for help has increased alongside the skyrocketing cost of food. Betty Jo Kaser is the communications coordinator at the Calgary Food Bank, and she says the organization expects to spend around $4.5 million on food purchases in 2022. This is nearly twice what it had previously projected. Many food banks across the country have reported a steady influx of new users since the start of the pandemic. All right, stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back after the break with a look at investing confidence with Brendan Caldwell. Stay with us. A new survey indicates about a quarter of Canadians are losing their confidence in the stock market and looking to cash out. The study by finance comparison website Finder indicates the reasons behind these concerns stem from market volatility and budget restrictions. This comes as the rising cost of food and gas continues to impact Canadians and businesses amid rising interest rates. But is cashing out on investments the answer here? All right, well, joining us now to talk more on this is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back.
Nima, always great to be here. Thank you.
Always great having you, Brendan. Now, according to this survey, as we mentioned, a quarter of Canadians have lost their confidence in the stock markets and want to cash out on their investments. So, what are your thoughts on this mindset, Brendan?
Well, they should, by all means, cash out. But let me qualify that just a little bit. Nothing really bad has happened to the stock market, nothing tragic. It's down a bit, 10% maybe, depending on which market you're talking about. The US market isn't down as much in Canadian terms because of our currency not being terribly strong. Prime Minister Trudeau, call your office. But if you're really feeling uncertain about the market now, if you're really worried, then sell a little bit. 10%. Or you said a quarter of Canadians were uncertain, sell a quarter, sell something. If you're genuinely really concerned, because I can tell you what, that will make it easier to do one of two things. Either the market keeps going down, in which case you will feel that it was smart of you to have sold something, and you'll be able to sell more, and it'll make the next decision easier. We've talked about that logic when it comes to the buy side, but it applies to the sell side as well. And two, if you're wrong, if October, which is traditionally a tricky month for the markets, going back to 1929 and then again in 1987, once you're at the other end of October, you might find that the market actually goes straight up from here. And if you still have 75 or 90% of your money still invested, well, you'll be glad you didn't cash out altogether. Generally, I find that when investors capitulate, decide to cash in, particularly nervous individual investors, then that tends to signal the bottom of the market. So if you're really nervous, or if you need money 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from now, sure, sell what you need, raise the money you need now. Nothing really bad has happened yet.
Now, another thing to consider here is that we're in a bear market right now, Brendan. That's similar to something we've seen in 2020. So how do you think this is impacting the mindset of investors?
Well, I think this is a very different situation than 2020 for a bunch of reasons. 2020, it was a bear market in as much as the market was like we'd never seen before. The market was at all-time highs, then COVID, and we cratered for 2 months. The market went down until the middle of May, and then went on a raging tear for the next 18 months, fueled by low interest rates. Flash forward to the present, we don't have not as low interest rates anymore. Markets are nervous about how high rates will go. And as I'm sitting here right now, I'll tell your viewers, I have no idea how high they're going to go, probably higher, as central banks around the world are attempting to combat inflation. But it's a very different scenario. And where 2020 was a short, sharp drop, this has been a bit of a death of 1,000 cuts, as people have not really wanted to believe this or that or the other scenario, whether it's inflation or interest rates or Ukraine, is as bad as all that. Which is why I say, if people really are feeling down about this, do something, but I wouldn't do everything. I wouldn't sell everything right now today, but if you're really nervous, I'd sell something.
All right, Brendan. Now, stock market volatility, it makes sense that it's making investors a little uncomfortable, especially with the rising interest rates, thoughts around a potential recession. So some may think that market timing is the answer. What are your thoughts on that, Brendan? Just about a minute left.
All right. People never talk about volatility when the market's going like like that upwards to the right, and people are making money. They never talk about the ups and downs in terms of volatility. Volatility seems to be universally a euphemism for the market going down. And yeah, market going down do make people nervous, but the actual volatility, the actual ups and downs, this time-based approach that I'm advocating, either for selling or for buying, will, I think, stand you in better stead. Because if you haven't got anything invested right now, this is an ideal time to get started with something, even if it's $1,000, and then do another 1,000 next month. You will find yourself in better stead as you accumulate wealth, because you can take advantage of the volatility, you can take advantage of the ups and downs, whether you're a buyer or a seller. Investors get trapped in the mental game of trying to be right. And you don't always have to be perfectly right, because none of us ever will be.
Always some great advice. Brendan, thank you again for your time today. Welcome back. Now it's time for Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Seema. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, what a week it has been. We saw a major move higher in the broader indices Monday and Tuesday of this week, up by about 5% across the board. You actually saw about 1,500-point gain on the Dow. Really a major rebound, the largest we've seen, two-day rebound that is, since April of 2020. And it does follow 5 weeks of decline. So interesting to note that we've got this major rebound, again, following some significant declines over the past number of weeks. Now, why did this happen? Well, the move was really driven by many market participants concluding that the U.S. Federal Reserve has been so aggressive in raising rates that they're going to bring the economy to a breaking point. That's the word you're going to be hearing in the news, that we are close to a breaking point. At which point, investors are saying, look, they're going to have to put the brakes on. They cannot continue to do this. People cannot afford higher rates on variable mortgages. Governments and corporations also can't afford to pay higher interest payments on the debt that they've been accumulating since the financial crisis. That's just part of the problem. So the market, of course, is a forward-looking mechanism and is starting to price in the potential that the U.S. Federal Reserve might actually put the brakes on their rate hike and tightening the financial system. Having said that, though, there was actually little follow through in the market on Wednesday. That's as investors recognize that the Fed really has not changed their narrative at all. You've got 30-year mortgage rates at a 16-year high. So kind of the fixed income market's also telling you, hey, we're not too sure that the Federal Reserve is going to pull back there. There's also, of course, concern that there's been a lot of damage that's already been done in the broader fundamental economic outlook for the United States as well as Canada. You've got some of the most recent economic data, such as manufacturing and services PMI, coming in lower than expected. Initial jobless claims in the United States also higher than expected. Fear that earnings will have to come down, and we'll probably hear more about corporate layoffs. So that's probably why we didn't have much of a follow through. Stepping back, there's 2 key events that you need to know about this week. One that triggered so much volatility in the market. One was the UK government's expansionary monetary policy having to be pulled back. It caused a lot of consternation within the markets, given the fact that they want to expand at a time when inflation is so high. They had to walk that back, and the BOE, the Bank of England, actually had to step in and support their currency. The other key event that was swirling around over the weekend that got put aside, which I find quite interesting by the market, is Credit Suisse. There was concern, or maybe still is, that they have some financial stability issues. They, of course, have denied the fact that they were out talking to large investors to raise funds. But nonetheless, the cost of insuring Credit Suisse bonds did climb to 15%, saying that, there is concern about their balance sheet. Those are levels, the cost to insure their bonds, that we've not seen since 2009. Those are 2 key global events that, aren't front and center right now. What's front and center is the U.S. Federal Reserve and whether or not they're going to cause a breaking point, but do keep those in mind. Now, in terms of market moves, as I mentioned, we did see the equity markets finish lower on Wednesday. We really didn't get to see that follow through from the strength on Monday, Tuesday. I don't think that's too worrisome. Quite typical, in fact. WTI has been up by about 10% over the past 3 days. Big news here as it relates to the energy sector. OPEC Plus decided on a big production target cut, slashing output by 2 million barrels per day. Reports that Russia and Saudi wanted to support the oil price. President Biden said that he's disappointed with the decision and is calling on U.S. energy companies to bring oil prices down. But oil prices are a function of supply and demand. So I don't think it's as easy as that. Away from that, from a stock perspective, the other big news in stocks this week, of course, is Twitter. Elon Musk did submit a letter on Monday that he intends to go through with the initial the deal to buy Twitter shares at $54.20. That could go through by the end of this week. It's seen as somewhat surprising, just given all the criticism he's had surrounding Twitter and their user data. But questions do remain. How much Tesla shares does he have to sell? What major management changes will he make? What will Twitter look like 3 years out? And it is expected he'll bring it back to the market. As it relates to the TSX, just a couple stories here. Real estate is front and center. We are seeing the cooling effects. Toronto listings hit a 20-year low. We're seeing telcos and real estate trade a little bit lower, and do expect that the BOC will continue to raise rates by about 50 basis points on October 26th. That does it for me. Nima, back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, airing Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern only on the News Forum Network. Stay with us. More news from around the world coming up next. It's being called the deadliest rampage in Thailand's history. A former policeman burst into a daycare center in the country's northeast, and he killed dozens of children and teachers and then fired on more people as he ran away. Authorities say the gunman had been fired from the police force earlier this year because of a drug offense. At least 37 people were killed in the attack, and 24 of them were preschoolers. The gunman took his own life after killing his wife and child at home. All right, switching gears to concerns of sabotage in Sweden, where the Domestic Security Agency is investigating leaks from two major pipelines in the Baltic Sea. The organization says it has strengthened its suspicion of sabotage after the preliminary investigation into the Russian gas pipelines. A prosecutor says evidence at the site has been seized. This with the Swedish Security Service probe confirming that detonations caused extensive damage to the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines last week. Sweden and Denmark previously stated that they suspected a deliberate act of sabotage. Meanwhile, Russia has launched two missile attacks that hit apartment blocks in the southern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia. The missile strikes came just hours after Ukraine's president announced that the country's military had retaken 3 more villages. This was in one of the regions illegally annexed by Russia. The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog is expected to visit Kyiv this week to discuss the situation at the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree declaring that Russia is taking over the facility. All right, turning to South Korea, which says North Korea flew 12 warplanes near their mutual border earlier today. This prompted South Korea to launch 30 military planes in response. The South's military says 8 North Korean fighter jets and 4 bombers flew in formation. It adds the North Korean planes were believed to have conducted air-to-surface firing drills. Earlier, North Korea fired 2 ballistic missiles toward its eastern waters, and South Korea conducted naval drills with the U.S. and Japan off the Korean peninsula's east coast in response. All right, moving to a concerning survey that found babies in Ethiopia's embattled Tigray region are dying in their first month of life at 4 times the rate before the war. The war cut off access to most medical care for over 5 million people. This is according to a yet-to-be-published survey shared with the Associated Press. Almost 2 years have passed since the war cast the Tigray region into twilight. This with basic services such as phone, internet, and banking severed. United Nations-backed investigators last month said Ethiopia's government is using starvation of civilians as a weapon of war. All right, well, meanwhile, the war in Ukraine continues to send shockwaves throughout global economies. Most recently, the International Monetary Fund once again lowered its projections for global economic growth in 2023. IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva says the risks of recession are rising. This comes as the world's financial outlook is more likely to get worse than it is to get better. She adds that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that began in February, has dramatically changed the IMF's outlook on the economy. Turning our attention to Kenya now, where advocates are protesting the country's reversal of a ban on genetically modified foods. Food security, consumer rights, and biodiversity groups are saying the public wasn't consulted on the issue, which is key to the country's economy and safety. Kenya's new president, William Ruto, earlier this week announced that the cabinet had effectively lifted the decade-old ban, which was on openly cultivating and importing genetically modified crops. The decision came after pressure by the United States government, which argued that the ban affected U.S. agricultural exports and food aid. Following a major cyber attack, Australia is making moves to protect vulnerable customers. This comes after personal details were stolen by hackers on the nation's second largest wireless carrier. The government said in a statement on Thursday that changes to regulations help providers like Optus coordinate with other countries, especially in the detection and mitigation of scams and other malicious cyber activities. More than 1 in 3 Australians had personal data stolen. This was when Optus lost the records of almost 10 million current and former customers in the hack. All right, well, the Nobel Prize for Literature has been awarded to French writer Annie Ernaux. The Swedish Academy said 82-year-old Miss Ernaux was recognized for the courage and clinical acuity of her writing. She is one of France's most honored authors and a prominent feminist voice. Still to come, the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize will be announced tomorrow, and the Economics Award will be announced on October 10th. All right, take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.